Good morning. My name is Deja Thomas, and I'm a survey analyst with the Public Policy Institute of California. Welcome to our virtual program today, featuring our latest PPIC statewide survey on Californians and their economic well-being. Today's event is supported with funding from the R.J. and Francis F. Miller Foundation and the James Irvine Foundation. We thank them for their support. For today's program, Associate Survey Director Dean Bonner will walk you through some of the key findings from the survey, and then we will discuss some of our main takeaways and answer some questions from the audience. Before I introduce my colleague, I have a couple of housekeeping items. As a reminder, PPIC is a public charity and does not take or support positions on any ballot measures or legislation, nor does it support, endorse, or oppose any political parties or candidates from public office. And also, if you have any questions about the survey, please send an email to the address on the screen. That's ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. And please include the name of your organization as well as your name with your question. I would now like to welcome Associate Survey Director Dean Bonner. Dean?
Hi, thanks, Deja, for the kind introduction. And while I'm sharing my screen, I do want to recognize my other co-authors on this report, who include, of course, Deja, as well as Survey Director Mark Baldessari and Survey Analyst Lauren Mora. I would also like to acknowledge the funders of this survey, the James Irvine Foundation and R.J. and Francis F. Miller Foundation. And, prior to discussing this survey in particular, I want to take a moment to talk about the PPIC Statewide Survey, which is now in its 25th year of existence. The mission of the statewide survey is to provide timely, relevant, and nonpartisan data on political, economic, and social opinions, which we hope will be used to inform and improve policymaking, raise awareness, and encourage discussion. Since 1998, the PPIC statewide survey has provided a voice for over 400,000 Californians in more than 200 general issue-specific and regional surveys. Today, I'll be presenting the findings on the Californians and their economic well-being survey. This is the 4th annual survey that we've done on this topic. And it's quite special in the sense that it includes an oversample of Californians with incomes less than $40,000. This is, first, I would say we were able to do this due to the generous funding that we've received. And this actually provides us the ability to look at this subgroup on its own in a way that we would not be able to do otherwise. The survey was conducted online using the Ipsos Knowledge Panel from October 3rd to October 19th. And we interviewed 2,250 adults, just over 1,000 lower income Californians, and nearly 1,400 likely voters in this survey. The margin of error for all adults is 3.3%, for the likely voters is 4%, and for the lower income Californians is 5%. And now let's get started looking at some of the survey results. We'll begin by looking at the broader economic outlook. And in doing so, we find that nearly 2 in 3 Californians expect bad economic times in the next 12 months. And about 2 in 3 have expected bad times over the last year, while majorities have felt this way dating all the way back to November 2021. This is a broad perception, with most Californians across parties, regions, and demographic groups thinking that bad times are ahead, except among 2 groups, Democrats and African Americans, who both have slim majorities expecting good times at this point. And when asking about the availability of well-paying jobs in their part of California, we find that 8 in 10 Californians say that this is at least somewhat of a problem, with about 1 in 4 calling this a big problem. We've seen similar shares hold this opinion in recent years, but this perception was slightly higher in our first well-being survey in 2020 at the height of the pandemic. About 8 in 10 across parties and regions say that this is a problem, as well as 3 in 4 or more across demographic groups. It is notable that Californians with lower incomes are the most likely to say this is a big problem. And when we look at the oversample, so just looking at the group of lower income folks, we see a notable partisan divide, with half of Republicans compared to 4 in 10 independents and 1 in 4 Democrats saying the availability of well-paying jobs is a big problem. Additionally, lower income women are more likely than lower income men to hold this view. And over the last few years, there's been a lot of discussion about people fleeing California, who are leaving, what type of people are leaving, are people coming back? And we've asked Californians in each of our well-being surveys whether the lack of well-paying jobs has made them considering moving away from their part of California. Today, we find that roughly 3 in 10 Californians say they have considered this. And findings have been roughly similar dating back to 2020, when 1 in 3 said they were considering a move. As with many issues in California, there is a partisan divide, with Republicans the most likely to hold this view. Beyond partisan differences, we also find that lower income and younger Californians are more likely than others to say they have considered a move. Additionally, Californians who rent rather than own their homes are more likely to say they have considered a move. And it should be noted that across all these groups and overall, when asked if they would move elsewhere in the state or outside of the state, most respondents are saying that they would consider a move outside of the state rather than inside the state. And now let's take a look at how Californians are viewing their personal and household financial situation. Today, we find that most Californians are satisfied with their financial situation. However, fewer than 1 in 5 are actually very satisfied. 2 in 3 or more across parties, regions, and demographic groups are satisfied with their household financial situation today. And while there is broad-based satisfaction, there are differences when looking at the share who are very satisfied. Notably, those with incomes of $40,000 or less are far less likely than those making $80,000 or more to say that they're very satisfied. As well, we find that renters are much less likely than homeowners to be very satisfied. And while we know that lower income folks, as you see here, are less likely to say they're very satisfied, when we look at the lower income oversample, noticeable differences emerge. As you can see, those with incomes under $20,000 are actually different from those from $20,000 to $40,000. So this is noteworthy. Additionally, 6 in 10 Latinos, compared to about 4 in 10 in other groups, express satisfaction with their household's financial situation. And while there isn't a partisan divide among all adults, we do find that there is a partisan divide within the lower income sample, with 6 in 10 Democrats saying they are satisfied, compared to fewer than half of independents and Republicans. And we've been tracking how Californians are feeling about their personal finances and how that compares to a year ago. And as they have in each other well-being survey each fall in the last 4 years, a majority say their finances are about the same as a year ago, while 3 in 10 say that they're worse off than a year ago, and just 16% say that they're better off than a year ago. About half or more across parties, regions, and demographic groups say that their finances are about the same. As a year ago. However, differences do emerge when we're just looking at the groups who say that they're worse off. Across income groups, the share saying they're worse off declines with rising income. And notably, Republicans and independents are about twice as likely as Democrats to say that their personal finances are worse off than a year ago. And when we're looking at just the lower income sample of those making less than $40,000, we find that those who have never attended college are more likely than college graduates to say their personal finances are worse off, while whites are also more likely than other racial ethnic groups to say this. We find that half of lower income Republicans say they're worse off, while about 4 in 10 independents and 1 in 4 Democrats say their situation is worse off than a year ago. So even on something like the economy, as we've seen in finances, there is this partisan divide that remains. And while many Californians are at least somewhat satisfied with their own financial situation, they're more pessimistic when looking towards the future. Specifically, a record high 71% of Californians say that when today's children grow up, they'll be worse off financially than their parents. This share has risen 8 points since 2 years ago and is much higher than 5 years ago when just 50% said this. This pessimistic feeling is widespread, with more than 6 in 10 across parties, regions, and demographic groups saying that today's children will be worse off than their parents. Whites are more likely than others to hold this pessimistic view, and this perception increases with higher incomes and educational attainment. Notably, those without kids 18 or younger in their house are much more pessimistic than others. And among Californians with incomes of less than $40,000, the view that children will be worse off is much more prevalent among college graduates than among those without a degree. And those without children in the home are far more likely than those with children 18 or younger in the home to say that these children will be worse off than their parents. One of the other things beyond the oversample that makes this survey kind of different or unique from other statewide surveys that PPIC does is we ask a lot about the experiences and perceptions of Californians when it comes to economic insecurity. In a series of questions, we ask Californians about experiences with various financial difficulties in the last year. And by a good margin, the financial difficulty experienced by most by Californians was cutting back on food and reducing meals to save money. With inflated grocery costs being common as of late, we find that 3 in 10 Californians and over half of lower income Californians said they experienced this. Across regions, we see that about 1 in 4 in the San Francisco Bay Area report this, compared to about 1 in 3 elsewhere. Notably, women and Latinos are much more likely than men and other racial ethnic groups to say that they had to cut back on food. And those with children in the house are much more likely than those without to say they have done this. We find that other difficulties experienced by California include fewer than 1 in 5 saying that they put off seeing a doctor or purchasing medicine, say that they could not pay a monthly bill, or had difficulty paying a mortgage. On all of these situations, Latinos and lower income Californians were especially likely to experience this. And beyond just asking about which financial difficulties they've experienced, we also ask Californians how much they are worrying about a number of financial issues. Of the 8 issues we asked about, Californians were most likely to say they worry every day or almost every day about saving for retirement or the cost of housing. Fewer Californians are worried about the amount of debt they had, paying their bills, or the cost of healthcare, but still 1 in 5 or more say they're worrying about these. Once again, across all of these circumstances, worry is higher among Latinos and lower income Californians, especially those with incomes under $20,000. We also asked parents about worrying about the cost of childcare and saving for their child's college education. We find that 1 in 3 parents say they worry every day or almost every day about saving for their child's education, while about 1 in 10 say they worry about the cost of childcare. It should be noted that when you break it down by those with younger children at home, there is an elevated level of worry when it comes to these parents compared to parents who may have older kids. So while there is a big difference between saving for a kid's education and childcare, obviously older kids, the cost of childcare is less than younger kids. Now we'll turn to some questions that we asked of Californians that are at least part-time employed. And what we find is that when asked if they're satisfied with their job, 9 in 10 employed Californians say that they're satisfied. However, only about 1 in 3 are very satisfied. Satisfaction today is similar to results in our 2021 and 2022 well-being surveys. As well, overall satisfaction is quite similar across parties and regions, although those in the Inland Empire are more likely than others to be very satisfied, and Asian Americans are less likely than others to say that they're very satisfied with their job. Notably, lower-income Californians are much less satisfied with their jobs, while, interestingly, satisfaction is similar across education groups. We also asked employed Californians what type of benefits and other opportunities that their jobs provide. Most Californians say that their job offers at least a fair amount of job security, and say that their job provides sick leave and health coverage. Healthcare coverage, I should say. Those with incomes under $40,000 are less likely to say this, as are Californians with less education. Fewer Californians say that their job offers opportunity for growth and advancement or educational training and assistance, both of which are key elements when it comes to economic mobility. On both of these aspects, we also find wide differences across income and educational attainment. Not featured on this chart are questions about stable and predictable pay and stable and predictable hours. And in both cases, we find that about 8 in 10 Californians say that their job offers this. Lastly, just 6 in 10 Californians say that decisions made at work take their views and concerns into account. So that's noteworthy. Even though there is this satisfaction, many Californians, at least 4 in 10, are saying that their job doesn't necessarily take their views into account. And another topic related to work is the impact that artificial intelligence, or AI, may have on the workplace in years to come. AI, or new technologies, has the potential to impact jobs all across the income scale, whether it be fast food workers or or workers that work on screenplays and whatnot. It's the first time we're asking about AI, and we find that most Californians have not heard much about AI and do not have a favorable opinion of it. When we ask employed Californians how worried they are about AI or other technology eliminating their job, we find that about 3 in 10 say they're worried, with just 6% saying they're very worried. Concern is higher among lower income Californians compared to others, while it is similar among men and women across racial ethnic groups and age groups. Notably, those with an unfavorable opinion of AI are much more likely to be worried about their job being eliminated. In this survey, we also asked a number of questions about labor unions. Among the findings on labor unions, we find that 7 in 10 Californians, including majorities across parties, approve of labor unions. 85% think that it's important for workers to organize so that employers do not take advantage of them. And 3 in 4 side with workers in the labor dispute between television and film actors and film studios, which just last night seems to have come to a resolution. Looking towards the future, we asked Californians if they'd like to see labor unions in the United States have more influence, less influence, or about the same influence as today. And we found that a plurality of 41% say that they want labor unions to have about the same influence as today, while 1 in 3 want labor unions to have more influence, and 1 in 5 want labor unions to have less influence. And while there is bipartisan approval on unions overall, there is a political divide when it comes to the influence of unions. Nearly half of Democrats want them to have more influence, while nearly half of Republicans want them to have less influence. Independents are actually divided on this between more influence and the same amount of influence as today. Across regions and demographic groups, Californians either want the same amount of influence today or are divided between more influence than today and the same amount. And as we have in the past well-being surveys, we asked Californians a series of questions about policies that are designed to improve economic well-being of Californians. In total, we asked about 9 policies, and 8 of the 9 policies actually received majority support among Californians. Californians are most supportive of increasing funding for job training. On this question, 2 in 3 across or more across parties are in favor, as well as overwhelming shares across regions and demographic groups. There is also bipartisan support for increasing government funding for childcare programs for lower-income working parents. And one of the widest political divides can be found on a government policy to eliminate college debt, where 57% favor overall, including 69% of Democrats and just 25% of Republicans. We also asked about 2 issues that will likely be on the ballot in 2024, rent control, as well as raising the minimum wage. And we found that solid majority support, although a wide partisan divide, on both of these issues. Now, there are a lot of other topics that we weren't able to cover today, but I do encourage you to go to the website and look at the report, as well as crosstabs that we have among all adults, likely voters, and the lower income oversample. We asked a number of topics about approval of the governor and legislature handling the economy, perspectives on working from home, as well as perceptions of the American dream. And at this point, I do want to encourage everyone, if you do have a question, to send the question to ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. And please include your name and the name of your organization, if possible. At this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite Deja back to discuss some key takeaways that she has from this survey.
Thank you, Dean, for that wonderful and informative presentation of today's survey findings. This survey certainly covered a wide range of areas regarding economics, and you did like a really excellent job walking us through many of the important topics. I just wanted to kind of mention some of the remote work findings that we saw in this survey, just because I think it's worth revisiting and mentioning, but also it's a topic that I'm kind of interested in writing about. So in our survey, we had the chance to ask about people's workplace preferences, and we found that about 4 in 10 employed Californians prefer in-person work, 3 in 10 have a preference for remote work, and 1 in 3 prefer a mix of both. So basically, if you combine those latter 2 groups, this is roughly 6 in 10 who are saying that they prefer something other than just in-person work in the workplace. And diving a little deeper into these findings among different work type groups, I found that most Californians are actually okay with their current work situation, whatever that might be. For example, a majority of those who say they prefer in-person work at the workplace are also currently working in person, as do remote workers with remote work, and those with a hybrid situation preferring that mix. It gets a little more interesting when you look at respondents who prefer something that isn't their current work situation. And this kind of gleans into what we're seeing with the shift toward more remote and hybrid work situations with a little more detail, I think. About a quarter of employed remote working adults say that they prefer a mix, and very few of this subgroup would want to go back to being in person. Similarly, about 1 in 3 workers in hybrid work situations say that they prefer to be fully remote. And again, very few say that they prefer being in person instead. And among in-person workers in the state, 2 in 10 say that they'd rather work remotely, and about a quarter say they prefer a mix over their current in-person situation. So for the most part, workers who are both fully or partly remote seem to prefer that flexibility. And while a majority of in-person workers prefer being in person, there's the other 4 in 10 or so who say they would prefer not being in person at the workplace all the time if they choose. So I guess we'll see what happens, and I hope we can continue to track this question to see if this is like a long-term effect or if this is permanent, you know? Okay.
That's a great topic and something that I really wish we could have covered in the briefing, but there's only so much time. So
Yeah.
looking forward to what you might write on this as well. So
right. Thanks. But okay, we should probably move to Q&A now. As a reminder to everyone in the audience, you can still submit your questions to ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. And again, please leave your name and the name of your organization with your question. Okay, let's see what we have here. First question, your survey talks about the large share of Californians who see the availability of good-paying jobs as at least somewhat of a problem. Has this share changed at all over time in light of shifting economic conditions? Dean, did you want to take this one?
I mean, this is something that I was curious about, but we haven't seen a large change overall. I think it's ranged from like 88% to 82% who are overall satisfied, and the share that call it a problem, while the share calling it a big problem has been about 1 in 4 each time. So there hasn't been, despite kind of layoffs and despite kind of the shifts over the pandemic, notably there really hasn't been much of a change in this, and that in and of itself I think is kind of noteworthy, the fact that there hasn't been this change. So
yep, I completely agree. I think it's interesting that even though there have been a number of things that you might think might shift opinion, it hasn't really happened. But yeah, okay. Another question. Your survey, oh, sorry, that's the same question. While inflation has cooled in the past year, high consumer prices remain a big economic story in our state and nationally. Does this survey provide any insights into that issue?
You
can go ahead.
That's a good question. We were thinking about asking about inflation specifically, but we didn't ask about inflation. But the thing that does kind of stick out to me is this share of Californians who saying they're cutting back on food, especially, or reducing meals. And that's a little, it's 3 in 10 today. I think it was closer to 1 in 4 in our early surveys, which is interesting given, that at that point we're talking, at the height of the pandemic in 2020 and 2021. And so that is kind of interesting. We've especially seen this kind of increase in lower income Californians who are saying they're cutting back on food. And so I do think that that's kind of related to that, as well as, the worry when it comes to things like paying bills. And so while we haven't asked specifically about inflation, I think that this at least tells us something, or at least something that I definitely want to dive into a little bit more to kind of get to understand who are the folks who are more likely beyond income groups to say that they're kind of cutting back on food. And is there any ties to that with this idea of inflation?
Yeah, for sure. I was definitely just going to add that the lower income Californians are definitely more adversely affected than residents with higher incomes, but it would definitely be important to look at other ways that these things are connecting the dots. Okay, we have another question. Why do you think that there is a growing share of Californians who say that children growing up here will be worse off financially than their parents?
I'm gonna let you go first. I've been
Yeah.
talking too much, so.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's true that the share has been rising over time ever since PPIC first recorded this question in December 2014. And even then, a majority has said this, and we've only seen that majority grow to the record high 7 and 10 that we're seeing in this month's survey, even while accounting for the mode change from telephone surveys in 2014 and I think 2018 to online surveys that we've used from 2020 and on. So why are people feeling pessimistic about this? Well, I think it's a number of things that I can kind of pick out of our survey, I think. So, for example, today a majority say they expect bad times economically, and a majority has said this since 2021. And Dean, you mentioned this in your presentation, but there are 3 in 10 who had to cut back on food, another 1 in 10 saying they've had to put off a doctor's visit or unable to pay a bill or had difficulty paying their rent or mortgage. Then on top of that, 2 in 10 or more Californians are worried about the cost of housing, cost of healthcare, the amount of debt they have, their bills, and whether or not they'll be able to save for retirement. And also most say that the availability of well-paying jobs is at least somewhat of a problem, right? So, and that's been being said since December 2020. And I think a lot of this, it might be piling up on people in the state. And when you ask them to think about these issues and concerns that don't really seem to be going away in the past few years, and then to think about how children today will fare, then when they become adults, it's kind of difficult to be optimistic, perhaps.
Yeah. One thing on this, I think back, I'm not exactly sure when it was this year, but we asked that question about housing and whether or not people felt that younger or like the younger generation, their family would be able to afford a house or something along those lines. And I think it was like 6 in 10 being very concerned that the younger generation wouldn't be able to afford a home. And that, I think, is part of kind of the concept of being financially well off for many people includes kind of the idea of being able to buy a home. And of course, we ask questions about the American dream in this survey. And, you know, that many folks say that the American dream either never existed or no longer existed, with half saying that it once did but never does, and 6 in 10 saying that it's harder to achieve in California. So I think with all the things you mentioned, you kind of add these other perceptions that people have. And I do think that there is this concern about, you know, future generations being worse off. So.
Yeah. Okay. We have a question from Maria Aquino at the James Irvine Foundation. City. Can you speak more on the opportunities people see in their work by region in terms of training and advancement? Interested in Central Valley and Inland Empire.
Yeah.
Off the top of my,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't have it off the top of my head, but I do have the handy dandy crosstabs that we have. And I can say that when it comes to the job offering educational and training assistance, that there are differences across income. Specifically, you know, 45% of employed Californians in the Central Valley say that their job offers this, and that's compared, of course, to 53% overall. In the Inland Empire, meanwhile, 6 in 10 employed adults feel like their job offers opportunities for advancement, offers training and assistance. Elsewhere in the state, half in Los Angeles, 54% in Orange, San Diego, and 58% in the Bay Area. And when it comes to career and growth opportunities, there's somewhat less fluctuation, but we find that 6 in 10 in the Central Valley say their job offers this. 3 in 4 in the Inland Empire, Los Angeles, and the Bay Area, and 2 in 3 in Orange, San Diego. And so overall, on both of these questions, those in the Central Valley are among the least likely to say that their job offers this, while those in the Inland Empire are kind of more similar to other regions. So we definitely appreciate that question, as well as the funding that the Irvine Foundation has provided.
Yes, for sure. Looks like we've got another question. When you consider the overall pessimism about the state's economy, is there any interesting variation across different parts of the state? Actually, yes, there are some interesting differences across the regions when it comes to the general sense of pessimism around the state's economy. It's true that majorities across regions expect bad times, but this share is highest among residents in Orange, San Diego, where 7 in 10 say this, and lowest in San Francisco Bay Area. Also, Orange, San Diego, and Central Valley residents are the most likely to say they're not satisfied with their household's financial situation compared to somewhat fewer in other regions. This is kind of like another question or way to like see what people are thinking. And if I recall correctly, Orange, San Diego, and Central Valley are often one of the most likely to worry about different financial situations. I mean, obviously the Inland Empire as well, depending on different things. But Dean, did you have anything to add on this one?
Yeah, no, I if I'm recalling correctly, kind of Los Angeles and San Francisco both kind of separate themselves a little bit from the other 3 regions. And the one thing that kind of made me think of is that the fact that these are 2 of the more democratic areas of the state. And if we recall, Democrats and African Americans were the only 2 groups where there were majority saying good times. And so perhaps there's a link between partisanship there. Yeah.
No, that's true. That's good.
Yeah. Well, you've asked a number of questions, so I have a question for you since you weren't able to do the briefing today. Is there anything that really surprised you in the findings that we found in this survey? There was a lot there, of course, but yeah.
Yeah, there certainly was a lot. But I think for me, the opinions on artificial intelligence were the most interesting. Maybe not surprising, since like doesn't really sound like the perfect word for it. But when we first started thinking about this month's survey and what we would ask about, our team discussed an interest in tracking how people feel about artificial intelligence and how it relates to their jobs. And I was interested to see the demographic question breakdowns for this question. While for the most part, a majority have expressed an unfavorable opinion of AI, about half of men, Asian Americans, and college graduates are in favor. So that's like those 3 groups have kind of just separated themselves a little bit from the general vibe of the opinion. And the share saying that they have an unfavorable opinion declines as income decreases, and it also as income increases, I'm sorry, and also as age decreases. And you know, about 3 in 10 employed adults in the state say they're worried about their job being eliminated by AI. So all in all, I would be interested to continue asking about artificial intelligence where we can, with maybe a few more nuanced questions that might cover the scope of how AI could help or hurt, or maybe something even about AI related policies, if something like that ever comes up.
Yeah.
All right, I'm looking at the time and it looks like we've reached the end of our program. Thank you, Dean, for your presentation and for the key takeaways. I'd also like to thank our funders finally, and thank you to all of you for joining us online today. If you pre-registered for this event, later today you will receive a survey. We would greatly appreciate if you take a couple of minutes to respond to let us know how we did today. Thank you, and I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.